I discovered the map hidden between the spine of an ungainly atlas in my grandfather's study, its edges frayed like ragged scars. Under the flicker of my desk lamp, the parchment whispered under my fingertips, cool and brittle, with a faint tang of ozone that made my lungs ache. The lines etched across it shifted when I blinked. Rivers rerouted themselves, forests migrated, and trails appeared that led to places no compass could ever find. My breath hitched as I stared, heart drumming like distant thunder, certain that I hadn't imagined the change until the shapes quivered again, settling into a new pattern that pointed beyond any known boundary. I leaned closer, the leather strap of my watch pressing into my wrist, muffling the tick-tock that usually grounded me. The paper's surface felt alive, each curve and angle pulsing beneath my skin, as if it were drawing my blood. Outside, the wind rattled the old window panes, carrying the scent of wet earth and dying leaves, a promise of autumn's hush. With trembling fingers, I traced a forest path winding into a blank expanse, and the map shivered under my touch, revealing a name scrawled in spidery ink, No Man's End. A hush fell in the room. My vision blurred. I blinked, and the contours shifted once more, erasing the name and forging a new route, this one marked by a solitary tree symbol I didn't remember seeing before. The hush grew heavy, as though the map itself held its breath, waiting for me to choose. I rose, the floorboards creaking under my weight like the sigh of an old ship, and gathered the map into my coat pocket. The lantern's glow dimmed, and I knew I would follow whatever path it revealed, even if it led me into the edge of nothing. Dawn found me standing at the edge of an overgrown trail, the map's paper damp against my palm, its lines pulsing faintly as if alive. The air smelled of wet pine needles and cold fog, each breath tasting of Earth's slow decay. I stepped onto the path, boots sinking into moss that swallowed sound, and the world fell silent behind me. No birds sang, no wind stirred. Only the steady, almost imperceptible rustle of the map's shifting contours guided me forward. With each footstep, the trail revealed new symbols, tiny arrows etched into bark, stones arranged like silent sentinels, and patches of bracken that curled toward me, their undersides glistening with dew. The map quivered, and I paused to watch as a blank expanse rippled, forming a narrow line that led deeper into the forest's green gloom. My heart hammered. I cursed myself for following, yet I could not turn back. The paper in my pocket seemed to tighten around my ribs, compelling me onward. Sunlight slanted through the trees, painting the understory in streaks of gold and shadow. I inhaled the pungent scent of resin and damp wood, feeling an unnatural chill snake up my spine each time the map's lines revised themselves. The air grew electric, each breath crackling with the faint hum of something watching. My skin prickled as I reached a collapsed wooden bridge spanning a shallow creek, its planks warped and slick with algae. The map's new path curved across the creek bed itself, marked by a single stone archway on the far bank. I waded into the icy water, teeth chattering as the current tugged at my ankles, and the map glowed pale blue inside my coat. Halfway across, I heard a soft click behind me, a branch snapping under weight that wasn't mine. I whirled, heart in my throat, but saw only mist curling between the trunks. When I turned back, the bridge planks had rearranged themselves into perfect alignment, forming a dark tunnel entrance where no planks had stood moments before. The tunnel yawned before me, its interior too black to pierce with my flashlight. The scent of ozone grew stronger, crackling against my skin like static. I pressed my hand to the cool wood of the archway, and the map's edges lifted, revealing a single word in spidery ink. Beyond. The hush was complete. I inhaled. I stepped forward. The tunnel walls closed in around me, slick with condensation that dripped onto my sleeves with a hollow plink. My boots squelched against a floor of packed earth, as if the forest itself had burrowed beneath the bridge. But the air tasted of antiseptic ozone, clinical and unreal. The beam of my flashlight carved a narrow cone of light, revealing moss-covered bricks that curved into a low arch. And somewhere deeper, a faint glow pulsed like the heartbeat of the earth. I pressed onward, each step muffled, the hush so complete I could hear the echo of my own heartbeat in my ears. The map throbbed in my pocket, its lines shifting beneath my fingers even through fabric. A tremor ran up my spine when I realized the tunnel's curve matched a corridor on the parchment that hadn't existed moments before. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a vaulted chamber, ceiling lost in shadows. My flashlight revealed a circle of standing stones carved with symbols that matched the map's undecipherable runes. A sudden draft stirred them, and they sang, a soft keening like wind through hollow bone. Gooseflesh pricked my arms as the sound reverberated through the chamber, carrying a scent of ozone and wet stone. I stepped toward the nearest monolith, fingertips brushing the carved glyphs. My breath caught when the glyph glowed faintly beneath my touch, warming my palm with an impossible heat. The map quivered in my coat pocket. I drew it out, and the paper fluttered open to reveal the chamber's outline, now etched in fresh ink, center marked by a small circle. I swallowed. The map's circle aligned with the standing stones. But where was the exit? I turned, and the arch I had entered through had vanished, replaced by another corridor leading downward. My pulse thundered as I realized the map was my only guide. Behind me, the stone's keening deepened, and I felt an echo in my mind. A distant laughter I recognized but could not place. Memory's edges frayed as the symbols on the stones smeared into shapes of faces, half-formed, longing, accusing. I tucked the map into my pocket and followed the new passage, boots slipping on damp stone. The air grew chillier, laden with the scent of wet roots and the whisper of unseen wings. With every step I felt unmoored, as if I left pieces of myself in the keening chamber. Yet I pressed on, compelled by the map's quiet insistence. Go further. The next bend promised answers or oblivion. I had no choice but to find out which. A widening corridor opened into a vast cavern hewn from living rock, its walls slick with mineral veins that glowed faintly under my flashlight's beam. The air tasted of damp clay and electric ozone, and with every breath I felt a sudden, unnatural chill crawl through my lungs. Beneath my boots, the floor creaked as though the cavern itself strained beneath an invisible weight. I paused, listening to the distant hum of something deep in the stone, a vibration that thrummed through the map in my pocket. I drew it out. The inked lines had rearranged again, now converging on a single point at the cavern's center, where a circle of salt-white dust marked the ground. Around me, the rock face rippled, and faint impressions appeared, faces frozen in agony, mouths open in silent screams that dissolved when I blinked. A low, keening murmur rose, and I realized it was my own voice calling my name. Panic surged. I turned to retrace my steps, but the corridor had vanished, replaced by sheer walls of stone. The map pulsed in my hand, its edges curling inward like lungs collapsing. A single phrase scrawled itself across the blank margins. No turning back. My heart thundered. I had reached the point of no return. With shaking resolve, I stepped into the circle of dust. The faces on the walls faded, and the hum subsided into a low heartbeat that matched my own. I inhaled the cold air one last time, knowing that beyond this point lay the secret of the map and the truth of who I had become. A tremor rattled the salt dust circle beneath my feet, and the cavern seemed to inhale, drawing every echo of my breath into its vast throat. The standing stones around me blurred, their once solid forms liquefying into streaks of pale gray that dripped like wet paint down the rock walls. An unnatural chill crept up my spine, so fierce it felt as though the very air had turned to ice. My fingertips tingled, and I realized the map in my pocket was warm, pulsing like a slow heartbeat against my thigh. I unfolded it on the cavern floor. The inked lines had dissolved into a blank expanse, save for a single dot at the center, the only mark left where the circle had been. Beneath the dot, a word appeared in trembling script. Here. My chest tightened. Ground shifts. The dust at my boots swirled into a miniature vortex, carrying whispers that brushed my ears. Snatches of laughter, pleas, regrets, all tangled together. I pressed 2 fingers to my temple. Dizzy as memories I'd never lived flickered behind my eyes. A child's cry, a stranger's touch, an endless horizon of white. The lantern's glow warped, stretching into tendrils of light that beckoned me toward a narrow fissure in the cavern floor. I knelt and felt the cold earth give way under my palm. Inside, the scent of wet stone and ozone thickened, and I heard the muted drip of water echoing from some impossible depth. The fissure widened as I slid forward, the map's dot shining at the edge of sight, guiding me into the void. With each inch, the air grew lighter, the cavern's weight slipping away until nothing remained but the hush of unending space. I paused at the threshold, breath suspended between what I was and what I might become. Beyond lay the world the map had drawn and redrawn, a land without borders or memory, where identity itself could be rewritten. The map pulsed one last time, its warmth searing through my coat. Heart hammering, I exhaled and stepped into the blank. I stepped from the void onto a surface that felt not like earth, but like the inside of my own mind, soft and yielding, as if the world were made of memory itself. The air here tasted of rain-washed stone and something sweeter, like the echo of a forgotten lullaby. All around me, horizons rippled like water, folding into themselves, creating impossible landscapes. A forest of mirrors, a river of glass, and skies that bled from twilight into dawn in an instant. I drew the map from my pocket, but its parchment was gone, replaced by smooth skin etched with the same shifting lines. An endless topography of self. A heartbeat thrummed beneath my fingertips, and I realized it was mine. The map and I were one. Each contour I had followed, each symbol I had deciphered, had been a trace of my own identity, my own story. A wind rose, carrying whispers of those who had walked these nameless paths before. Lost travelers who, like me, sought borders to define themselves. Their voices wove into a single truth. The line between map and mapmaker, between path and pilgrim, was as thin as a breath. My heart swelled with both grief and wonder. I understood then that the real journey was not outward, but inward, to accept that boundaries are illusions, and memory the compass by which we navigate our own becoming. I closed my eyes and let the limitless landscape fold away, leaving only the pulse of my own breath. When I opened them again, I stood at the forest's edge, dew-soaked underbrush parting before me. In my hand, the map remained, not a tool, but a testament to transformation. My world had expanded beyond any chart. I never found that ferry terminal on any chart, but when I stepped onto the narrow wooden jetty at twilight, the air tasted of brine and damp moss, and I felt an uncanny pull drawing me forward. The boards beneath my boots creaked under a weight that wasn't mine alone, as if the pier exhaled a long-forgotten breath. In the half-light, the ferry's hull loomed like a slumbering leviathan, its dark paint peeling in salt-stained ribbons. A single lantern swung from the wheelhouse, casting a tremulous glow over windows so smeared with sea spray that no shadows stirred behind them. I hesitated. the faint hiss of foghorns somewhere beyond the shore resonating in my chest like a warning. Still, I stepped aboard. The deck gave a soft thud under my palms, and a cold gust carried the scent of wet timbers and something metallic, perhaps the echo of rusted machinery deep within the hull. No welcome voice called out. No crew appeared. Instead, something in the quiet hummed, as though the vessel itself were alive. I traced the railing's grain with my fingertips and shivered at its slick chill. Ahead, a narrow corridor opened into the belly of the ferry, each step beyond the threshold swallowed by darkness. My flashlight beam quivered, revealing rows of worn leather benches stained by years of salt and solitude. A low vibration thrummed through the floors, a heartbeat in slow, deliberate rhythm. I paused, pulse quickening, as the ferry's engines sputtered to life. Soft at first, then steady, though I had seen no one pull any lever. The dock fell away in the lantern light, and with a reluctant groan, the ferry began to drift into the fog. Panic rose in my throat, yet I felt rooted to the spot by something deeper, an instinctive conviction that I had already crossed an invisible threshold. Ahead, the corridor stretched into unlit doorways, each promising a different story. Somewhere in that labyrinth of halls lay the reason I had risked this journey. A name whispered in a dream, a face half-remembered from poems I never wrote. The mist curled around the ferry's prow like fingers, and I realized there was no turning back. The water closed over the jetty behind me, and the rhythm of the engine merged with the beat of my heart, guiding me towards strangers whose silhouettes waited in the gloom. Faces I felt I had seen before and would never forget. The corridor smelled of damp cedar and something older, like the faint copper tang of dried blood. But I reminded myself there was no violence here, only the slow decay of salt and wood. My flashlight's beam trembled across faded cabin numbers, each etched into corroded brass. The engine's heartbeat underfoot had grown louder, more insistent, as though urging me forward. I passed a row of closed doors, their handles matte with rust, and paused at one that bore a handprint, swayed soft, as though pressed by a child's palm. A whisper rose behind me, a syllable I almost understood, then dissolved into the hum of the ferry. Inside the cabin, the air was colder still, so frigid that each breath left a ghost of vapor dancing before me. My boots crunched on scattered debris. Pages from a journal, yellowed and brittle, each word smudged by salt spray. I knelt and lifted one, fingers brushing a line. Remember who waits. A shiver crawled up my spine. Behind me, the door clicked. My heart stuttered. I flicked off the flashlight, plunging the room into a darkness so complete it felt alive. Then a single pinprick of light. The bulb in a corner lamp, sputtering to life with a soft blue glow. The lamp illuminated a portrait on the wall, a woman's face half hidden in shadow, her eyes wide with something I recognized before I could place her. My knees went weak. I knew her smile. I had dreamed of it. Yet her lips were twisted, as if she cried silently. I stood, every muscle taut, and the lamp flickered again, revealing a small table beneath the portrait. On it lay a tarnished pocket watch, its glass cracked, frozen at 3:17. When I touched it, a jolt of cold pain shot through my fingertips, and the whisper returned, clearer this time. "You forgot me." A sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut. The lantern swung, casting long, wavering shadows that stretched toward me, like fingers reaching. I yanked at the latch, but it held fast. Panic rose, but beneath it, a steady determination. I needed to know what or who was waiting at 3:17. I pressed my ear to the door and heard muffled sobs, then silence. And beneath that silence, a soft, deliberate click, as if someone on the other side had wound the watch a single tick further. With trembling resolve, I pressed my shoulder against the wood, and let the question consume me. Had I come here to remember a face, or to become someone I no longer was? The door finally gave way with a groan, and I stumbled into a narrow stairwell descending into deeper darkness, the air growing heavier with the tang of oil and decay. Every step echoed on unseen metal girders, a hollow percussion that matched the thump of my heart. Water dripped from overhead pipes, each drop striking the floor with a tiny splash that resonated in the stillness. I pressed forward, the beam of my flashlight slicing through the gloom to reveal a row of numbered portholes, each sealed shut. But through one streaked pane I caught a flicker of movement, as if someone pressed a hand against the glass and then withdrew it, leaving only a wet smear. A distant hum rose around me, voices blending into a low chant that felt both sorrowful and urgent, speaking words I could almost understand, but never quite. The pocket watch in my pocket grew impossibly heavy, its cracked glass pressing cold against my thigh. At the bottom of the stairs, the corridor opened onto a lifeboat deck, where the empty cradles rocked gently, though no wind stirred. Beneath each cradle, a nameplate glinted. Strangers' names I didn't recognize, until I saw one that froze me in place. My own name. The lantern above sputtered and died, plunging me into a darkness so complete I felt swallowed. Then, just as the whisper returned, clear and insistent, "You belong here," the flashlight flickered back to life, revealing a silvery figure stepping forward from the shadows. The figure advanced with deliberate grace, each step muffled against the wet planks by the soft thud of its bare feet. My flashlight quivered in my hand, casting the silhouette into sharp relief. A woman in a faded sailor's coat, hair plastered to her cheeks by salt spray, eyes hollow as eclipse shadows. The air around her crackled, charged with something ancient, like the moment before lightning split the sky. I swallowed, tasting iron on my tongue and feeling the pocket watch burn against my thigh. She raised a trembling hand, and I saw it for what it was. My mother's ring, glinting on her finger despite the years etched into its silver band. My breath caught. I remembered nights at her knee, her voice soft as moonlight speaking of distant waters, and the brother I never met. Cold slithered down my spine. "You forgot me," she whispered, voice threaded with sorrow and accusation. The words rolled through me like waves, each one pulling me closer to a truth I had buried. Behind us, the ferry's engine sighed deeper, and the portholes rattled, as though the boat itself struggled to contain what lay beneath. I stepped backward, boots splashing in ankle-deep water that seeped from overhead cracks. The water smelled of brine and old leaves, as though the sea had dragged fragments of forest aboard. My mind spun with questions. How could she be here? Why had I allowed her memory to slip into darkness? Her gaze pierced me. "You left me," she said, voice now brittle, as if the years of abandonment had hardened into glass that cut with every syllable. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I fought them down. I had come seeking answers. My heartbeat raced, matching the boat's mechanical pulse. "I'm sorry," I managed, voice unsteady. She tilted her head, and for a moment, the ferry's lantern above flickered, revealing dozens of shadowed faces pressed against the windows, silent witnesses to my confession. The corridor behind her stretched endlessly into deeper gloom, each doorway opening into silent memories I could not yet face. The whisper returned, rising to a crescendo. "Remember!" The word echoed through my skull, and the pocket watch dropped to the deck with a resonant click, its hands spinning in reverse. A wave of vertigo washed over me. I realized then that this journey was not about a forgotten ferry, but about the river of my own lost years, and that I stood at the point of no return. My reflection shimmered in the water at my feet, fractured by ripples. I saw a stranger's face staring back. The man I once was, unscarred by guilt or grief. Then the ripples stilled, and her outstretched hand hovered between us, offering a choice: to reclaim what I had forsaken, or to let it sink forever into the depths. I inhaled, the cold contracting my lungs, and stepped forward, ready to grasp the memory I had abandoned. The deck trembled beneath my boots as I followed her flickering lantern light through the narrowing passage, water sloshing around my ankles with each deliberate step. The air grew thick with the acrid scent of burning oil and ozone, punctuated by the distant clang of pistons deep in the belly of the ship. My mother glided ahead, her figure wavering like a candle flame in the gloom, guiding me toward a heavy steel door embossed with a rusted wheel. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat echoing the engine's ceaseless pulse. I hesitated, fingertips brushing the cold metal, and inhaled the dank aroma of deep water and decaying rope. Each breath stung at the back of my throat. Then I pressed the wheel, and the door groaned open to reveal the engine room's cavernous maw. Coils of steam hissed from yawning vents. Shafts of pale light from overhead grates caught motes of dust dancing in the air, and the walls glistened with condensation. Amid the labyrinth of gears and pipes, I saw it. An old workbench where a wooden toy boat lay half submerged in a shallow puddle, its paint chipped and dulled by time. My chest tightened. I knelt and lifted the toy, memories rushing back in a flood of anguish and longing. My brother's laughter as we sailed that very boat across the bathtub waves, the promise I made to protect him forever, and then the silence that followed his disappearance. The engine's drone deepened into a low lament, and I realized the ferry itself mourned the souls it carried, my mother's among them. Behind me, she stood silent, her eyes reflecting a sorrow too vast for words. I clutched the toy to my chest, the wood slick and cold, and felt tears blur my vision. A sharp hiss cut through the haze as the hatch at the far end of the room yawed open, revealing a narrow shaft of darkness twisting downward. From its depths rose the soft susurrus of voices, names I had once whispered into the night, promises I had let slip away. The pocket watch in my hand clicked twice, its hands spinning toward midnight. The whisper came again, urgent and fractured. "Bring us home." My grip tightened on the toy and the watch. My goal crystallized with painful clarity. I would open that hatch. With a trembling breath, I set my lantern beside the bench and stepped toward the yawning void. Steam curled around my face like ghostly fingers, the chill of the unknown seeping into my bones. As I reached for the latch, the voices swelled into a chorus of longing, echoes of every lost passenger, every forgotten promise, calling me deeper. My mother's hand found my shoulder, guiding but not restraining. I inhaled the metallic tang of fear, the wet pulse of water at my feet, and turned the hatch's wheel. The barrier gave way with a final, mournful groan, and the void beckoned me into the heart of the ferry's secret. I slid into the narrow shaft and felt the world tilt beneath me, darkness closing in like a velvet shroud, the voices of the forgotten swelling into a single, mournful chorus. My lantern's beam trembled across the slick walls, revealing rivulets of water that glowed faintly with phosphorescent algae. At the bottom lay a shallow pool, its surface glassy and still, reflecting a sky I could not see. I knelt and placed the toy boat upon the water. Its paint peeled away in flakes, drifting like pale petals. The voices hushed, replaced by the soft tick of the pocket watch in my hand, its hands now trembling toward midnight. A shape rose from the pool's mirror. My brother's face, pale and ethereal, eyes wide with longing. I reached toward him, heart hammering with regret and hope. His lips moved soundlessly, and I understood. He waited not for rescue, but for remembrance. With a trembling breath, I whispered his name and lifted him into the lantern's glow. The figure faded into a cascade of light, carrying the echoes of our childhood laughter back into memory's tide. Above me, the hatch creaked open, and I climbed onto the deck as dawn's first light painted the fog in rose and gold. The ferry lay moored at a familiar pier, its engines silent, its passengers gone. In my pocket, the watch lay still at 3:17, and in my hand, the wooden hull of a toy boat felt warm with memory reclaimed. I stepped onto solid ground, no longer chasing ghosts, but carrying them gently within me, transformed by loss and love's enduring echo. I first noticed the house at dusk, its silhouette standing like a dark question against the bruised sky. The road had narrowed to a single rutted track lined with gnarled oaks, whose twisted limbs whispered secrets in the fading light. A cold wind slid through the trees, carrying the faint scent of wet moss and something older, like extinguished candle smoke mingled with the tang of rusted iron. My pulse quickened as I pulled the car to a stop beneath the sagging porch. The boards groaned under my weight, though I hadn't yet set foot on them. I pressed my palm to the warped doorframe. Its wood was slick with damp, and a single rusted nail jutted from the center of the door like an accusing eye. Beyond the threshold, I could feel the air shifting. The hush was absolute, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I drew in a trembling breath, tasting cold ozone and the faintest trace of mildew. The moment I turned the handle, the world outside fell silent. No wind in the leaves, no distant highway hum, only the soft scrape of the latch and my own ragged inhale. Inside, the hallway stretched into gloom. The floorboards underfoot sank just enough to make me stumble, sending a flurry of dust motes dancing in the beam of my flashlight. I hesitated, fingertips brushing the peeling wallpaper, its faded floral pattern curling into shadows that looked like crawling hands. Each step felt like trespassing into something forbidden, an echo of memories I couldn't place, as though I had dreamed this corridor before. The beam of light caught a narrow staircase climbing into darkness, the banister carved with shapes that resembled half-forgotten symbols. A chill bled down my spine, sharp and sudden, as though the house had breathed on me. I shone the light toward the far wall and froze. A door stood there, one I had not seen on the exterior plans. It was sealed shut with heavy wooden planks, their edges blackened as if by old smoke. The air around it was colder still, and I could swear I heard a faint, almost rhythmical thump from the other side, like a heartbeat beneath dead wood. My heart pounded, echoing in my ears. "Turn back," the silence seemed to say. But curiosity had already claimed me. I slid my hand into my pocket and felt the cool metal of my car keys, grounding me for a moment before I stepped forward, drawn by that impossible pulse. My flashlight beam quivered as I edged past the sealed door and stepped into what must have been the parlor. The air grew colder still, as though the house exhaled a breath of ice the moment I crossed the threshold. Every footstep felt weighted. The floorboards sighed under my weight, releasing a rasping whisper that trailed after me like a warning. I swept the light across a battered hutch draped in moth-eaten lace, its cracked china staring back at me with hollow, empty eyes. A faint metallic tang curled on my tongue, and I realized it was the taste of old blood, or perhaps rusted memory. The silence pressed in from all sides, broken only by the distant scuff of something moving upstairs, slow and deliberate, as if pacing a corridor that no longer existed. I forced my heart to slow, willing my breath to steady, and advanced toward a portrait hanging crookedly above a marble mantel. The frame was carved with twisting vines that seemed to writhe in the beam's glow, and the painting depicted a woman whose face was half shrouded in shadow. Her eyes seemed alive, tracking me with a sorrow so deep it echoed in my chest. Gently, reverently, I reached out to touch the gilded edge, and recoiled as the wood beneath my fingertips pulsed, warm and almost breathing. A soft click sounded behind me, like a lock snapping into place, and I spun to find the sealed door's planks now glimmering with fresh condensation. The timber bowed as if something pressed from within. My blood ran cold. There was no turning back. I had felt the heartbeat in these walls, and now the house knew my name. I raised the flashlight again, resolving to follow that pulse wherever it might lead, and I could already sense that the truth waiting beyond the planks would change me forever. I sank to my knees and pressed my shoulder into the warped planks. The wood groaned, splinters biting into my skin. A sudden rush of cold air met me, sharp as cracked ice, carrying the scent of wet earth and something acrid I couldn't name. I could feel the pulse again, slow, deliberate, like an invitation or a warning. Heart hammering, I wedged my flashlight under a loose board and levered it free. The beam fell into a narrow opening, revealing damp stone walls slick with moss and a floor strewn with broken shards of pottery. I slipped through, coughing as the air thickened with dust and decay. My boots crunched on gravel. Each step echoed in the tight space like footsteps in a mausoleum. Above me, the floorboards creaked under gravity I no longer felt connected to. I shone the light around, half expecting something to blink back at me from the shadows. Instead, I found only a passage carved into the earthen wall, its edges rough and jagged, leading deeper into blackness. My breath coated my lungs in frost. The air tasted of rust and ozone, as though metal had been bent until it sparked. I followed the tunnel, fingertips grazing damp stone that pulsed faintly beneath my touch. The beam picked out scrawled symbols in charcoal, concentric circles intersected by a crooked cross, like an eye pierced by time. My chest tightened. These markings were old, primal, yet fresh, as if drawn by a hand trembling with fear. A distant sound drifted up the corridor, something dragging itself across uneven ground. The scrape was soft but unrelenting, a slow insistence that reverberated in my bones. I froze, every nerve alight. The sound stopped. Silence collapsed around me, thick and suffocating. Then it began again, closer now, rhythm shifting toward my heartbeat. I swallowed hard. Turning back meant climbing through the planks and retreating into ignorance, but pressing on promised answers, and perhaps madness. My fingers closed around a jagged stone, heart pounding with both dread and determination. I took a step forward. The tunnel opened into a small chamber lit by a single shaft of moonlight leaking through a crack above. In its beam sat a wooden cradle, empty but for a thin layer of dust that shifted, as if something had just moved. I raised the flashlight with trembling hands. The cradle rocked. A soft sigh echoed in the chamber. My reflection, no, not mine, flickered in the pool of moonlight, pale eyes watching me from the far corner. I understood then that I'd passed the point of no return. The house had drawn me here, and now I could no longer leave without facing whatever lay in that cradle's shadow. The cradle's rocking grew more insistent, as though guided by unseen fingertips. My flashlight trembled in my grip, casting jittering shadows that leapt across the damp stone walls. The air pressed in, thick with the musk of wet earth and something sweeter, like rotting honey, inexplicably mingled with the sharp sting of ozone. I could hear a soft whimper, barely louder than my own breath, coming from within the cradle's empty depths. My heart skittered. Slowly, I knelt and leaned closer, squinting to pierce the gloom. The cradle's wood was splintered, but I could just make out a scrap of fabric tangled in its slats, a fragment of lace, yellowed with age and stiff with dust. My fingers brushed it, and a sudden chill tore through my arm, as though I'd plunged my hand into freezing water. The whimper rose to a thin, keening cry, echoing off the rough walls and seeping into my bones. I forced myself to stand and swivel the beam toward the far corner. There, half hidden in shadow, stood a small rocking chair, its paint cracked and peeling. I swallowed, ears ringing with the cradle's lament. The chair began to sway back and forth, though nothing sat in it. With each sway, the cry grew sharper. Childlike terror twisted into something primal and pleading. My flashlight flickered. I blinked and the rocking stopped. Silence roared in my ears. Then came a soft footstep, bare and careful, just beyond the pool of light. I froze, every muscle coiling. The footstep repeated, closer this time, and then another, softer still, as if someone was shifting weight. My fingertip tightened on the cradle's edge. A faint voice, girl soft and urgent, whispered from the corner, "Help me." I swung the light around, heart lodged in my throat, but saw only darkness and the empty chair. The whisper came again, a breath on the back of my neck. "Please." Panic and pity warred inside me. I wanted to flee, to tear back through the tunnel and hide in the car's safety. But the plea resonated with something deep in my chest, an echo of a promise I'd made long ago to protect the lost. I swallowed and stepped toward the rocking chair, each floor crumb crunching like a scream. The moment my hand brushed the chair's armrest, the room shuddered. The cradle slammed against the wall, dust cascading like ash. The whispered plea turned to a wail that twisted through me, raw and sorrowful. Then the cradle fell silent, and the rocking chair froze mid-sway. My breath pounded in the hush. I realized with a sudden clarity that the house hadn't lured me here for my fear alone, but to demand compassion, to free its captive. My goal no longer felt like escape, but redemption. I inhaled the damp air, galvanized by a responsibility I could not deny, and stepped deeper into the chamber's heart, determined to confront whatever bound that child's spirit and break the cycle that held us both prisoner. I pressed onward through the narrow gap, every breath shuddering with cold as the tunnel widened into a low-ceilinged chamber. The beam of my flashlight revealed a low stone altar at its center, draped in tattered cloth that smelled of damp linen and decayed petals. My boots crunched over fragments of porcelain, tiny plates and cups, glazed in faded pastel patterns. Shards scattered like the remnants of a forgotten tea party. A single porcelain doll sat propped against the altar's base, its painted eyes cracked and blank, staring up at me with an innocence forever lost. I knelt beside it, fingertips brushing the cracked paint, and felt the whisper of something sorrowful brush my mind. Behind me, the tunnel groaned, as if warning me that time itself might collapse. I pivoted, shining the light on the far wall, where scratches formed a makeshift ladder leading to a small hatch above. My throat tightened. The escape I had hoped for lay just beyond that trapdoor. But before I could climb, my gaze fell on a leather-bound book resting on the altar's edge. Its cover was worn, the spine split, and its pages yellowed with age. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside, a child's neat scrawl told of days spent hidden here, counting heartbeats to keep from going mad, whispering names to keep loneliness at bay, begging for forgiveness no one could offer. The air around me grew thick, heavy with unshed tears and choking regret. A sudden sob echoed through the chamber. I leapt upright, heart pounding as the doll toppled over, its head rolling away like a severed trophy. The sob came again, closer, more anguished, and I realized it wasn't the house making the sound, but the spirit of the child, trapped for decades in this silent prison. My chest twisted with guilt and empathy. I had come seeking answers, but now I cradled the weight of a lost life in my hands. The book fluttered open to a final entry, I am sorry I broke my promise. Please let me go." The words burned like acid on my tongue. I stood, resolve hardening. The stakes crystallized, this specter's peace or my own. I climbed the scratched ladder, pulling myself through the hatch into a dusty attic room above. Moonlight spilled through a cracked skylight, illuminating an overturned rocking horse and more scattered tea-set pieces. Beneath a pile of rotting newspapers, I found a small, rusted key. Its teeth were bent, but it fit the lock on the cradle in the chamber below. My breath trembled. I realized then that the child's apology was not only to themselves, but demanded from me an act of mercy. I descended back through the hatch, the attic's stale air giving way to the tunnel's chill. The doll lay face down where I left it, and the cradle's whisper returned, softer now, tinged with hope. Kneeling once more, I fitted the key into the hidden latch. The cold metal greeted me like a friend. With a measured turn, I heard the small click of release echo through the chamber. The boards fell away, and in the moonlit beam, the cradle stood empty and still, no rocking, no plea. Silence enveloped me, vast and fragile. In that hush, I understood the deeper truth. Memory can imprison us as surely as walls can. The child's spirit had been captive of their own regret, waiting for remembrance to set them free. And in freeing them, I felt something inside me shift, an unburdening of my own fears and unresolved apologies. The altar cloth drifted to the floor, revealing a carved name, Eleonora. I whispered her name into the silence, an offering of acknowledgement and release. A gentle breeze stirred the dust motes into a shimmering swirl, and I sensed her gratitude as a warmth in my bones. As I climbed back through the sealed door, I carried with me a new understanding. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. I pushed through the hatch one last time, the chill of the tunnel giving way to the stale warmth of the parlor. Moonlight slanted through the cracked windows, illuminating dust motes that drifted like memory fragments. The cradle lay empty, its purpose fulfilled, and the sealed door behind me now sagged slack, as though forgiving my passage. My legs trembled, weighted by the enormity of what I had done and what I had become. Each breath I drew tasted faintly of ozone and damp stone, mingling with relief that was almost bitter. I made my way back across the hallway, the floorboards now silent under my boots. The portrait above the mantel, once so alive with sorrow, looked peaceful, its subject's shadowed eyes softened into acceptance. I paused, resting a hand on the cool marble, and felt the last thread of the house's pull unravel beneath my palm. Outside, the night breeze whispered through broken glass, carrying the faint scent of jasmine and fresh rain. The air no longer felt claustrophobic but oddly freeing, as though the house itself had exhaled the sorrow it had held so long. Stepping out onto the porch, I let the silence of the forest wrap around me. The oaks stood sentinel, their branches still creaking with ancient secrets, but their message had changed. Release, not trap. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, tasting cool pine and distant thunder rumbling across a sky about to break. In that moment, I understood that some doors are meant to be opened, not to trap us, but to set us free from the weight of our own regrets and forgotten promises. I climbed into my car, fingers tracing the worn leather of the seat, feeling both hollow and whole. The journey back would be long, but I carried with me Eleonora's forgiveness and a new compass for my own life. I arrived at my father's house on a rain-soaked afternoon, the sky bruised with low clouds that threatened to spill more secrets. The old Victorian stood like a weary sentinel at the end of the lane, its paint peeling and gutters sagging with winter's sorrow. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp carpet and cold wood, as though the house exhaled a long-held breath when I unlocked the door. I was here to clear out the last of my grandfather's belongings, a chore I had postponed for years, drawn by equal parts duty and dread. Upstairs, in a room my grandfather once used for his peculiar collections, I found it. A towering mahogany wardrobe whose doors were carved with swirling ivy and hidden faces that seemed to shift in the dim light. Dust motes danced in sunbeams slicing through the curtained window, and the silence of the room felt like a held note, waiting for something to break it. I hesitated, hand on the cold brass handle, feeling a faint vibration under my fingertips, almost a pulse. The wardrobe was locked, but the old padlock lay open on the floorboards, as though it had been waiting for me. I drew closer, breath catching as I sensed movement behind the polished wood. The floorboards groaned under some unseen weight, though I stood alone in the empty room. A cold spot spread across the back of my neck, prickling my skin, and the scent of damp earth and ozone filled my nostrils, strange in a sealed attic space. Despite every rational bone in my body screaming to step away, I reached out and pulled the doors open. The hinges whispered in protest, and a musty gust of air escaped, a breath of ages trapped behind cedar panels. Inside, the wardrobe was empty except for a single wooden hanger and a length of pale fabric draped over it like a veil. I must have blinked, because in that instant I thought I saw the fabric tremble. My rational mind told me it was the breeze from the cracked window. My heart said it was something else. A soft, almost imperceptible voice drifted from within the hollow space. So faint I thought I had imagined it. But when I stepped closer, the whisper returned, clearer and more urgent, as if urging me to enter. I froze. The voice was coaxing, familiar. I leaned in, chest tightening as the wardrobe's darkness beckoned. At that moment, I understood that this ancient piece of furniture held more than moth-eaten coats and forgotten memories. It held the echoes of someone's story, and perhaps it would soon hold mine. I stepped into the wardrobe's shadowy chamber, as though drawn through a veil, my heartbeat pounding in my ears. The air inside was cold and stagnant, carrying the faint, cloying scent of mothballs and something deeper, like damp moss pressed against ancient stone. My shoes tapped against worn wooden floorboards that groaned under my weight, as if protesting this trespass into forbidden space. Each breath I drew felt stolen, thick with dust motes swirling in the narrow beam of flashlight I'd wrested from my pocket. My fingers traced the carved ivy on the opposite wall, and I felt a whisper of movement, something shifting just beyond sight. I crouched to examine the clothes hanging on the lone hanger. A faded child's dress, its lace hem torn, the fabric stiff with age. A sudden chill swept through the chamber, and goosebumps rose on my skin as I lifted the dress gingerly, imagining the small body that once wore it. Behind it, hidden in a narrow recess, I found a bundle of yellowed letters tied with fraying string. The handwriting was precise and deliberate. My grandmother's. I untied them, and the first note crackled open. To Eleanor, my lost one. Forgive me for the promises I could not keep. My pulse thundered as I read, the words echoing in the silent darkness. A soft thump sounded above me, resonating through the wardrobe's wood like a heartbeat of its own. I froze, breath lodged in my throat. The letters slipped, scattering across the floor in a pale arc. One fluttered against the back wall, revealing a photograph. A sepia-toned image of a small girl with bright eyes peering into the camera, a dress identical to the one before me. But her expression was sorrowful, almost pleading, as if she knew someone would find this picture long after she was gone. The corners of the photo curled with age, and when I pressed it flat with trembling fingers, I heard the floorboards groan once more, closer now, as though a hidden presence drew near. Panic flickered, sharp and cold. I realized then that the wardrobe was not merely a container of memories. It was a conduit, linking me to a story I had never known, demanding I finish what my grandmother had left unfinished. The letters were my thread into that past, the dress a fragment of a life cut short. And as I gathered the photograph and letters to my chest, I understood with sudden clarity that this was a path I could not abandon. The weight of responsibility settled in my bones. I had to uncover what happened to Eleanor, or risk becoming yet another lost echo in this haunted chamber. The floorboards behind the wardrobe shifted under my weight, groaning like a beast disturbed from slumber, and I realized the carved panels hid more than shadows. My fingers traced the swirling ivy until I found a barely perceptible seam. My breath hitched as I pried it open, revealing a narrow hatch cut into the subfloor. A dank gust of air rose up, a mix of damp earth and stale perfume that smelled like the nursery long since stripped of life. I shined my flashlight down the hatch and saw a wooden ladder, its rungs slick with mildew and age. The ladder trembled under my first step, as though warning me to retreat. But I climbed down, each descent echoing like distant thunder, the cold enveloping me in an unnatural embrace. At the bottom, I emerged into a small, vaulted chamber carved from stone, its walls slick with subterranean moisture. The air here pulsed with ozone, and I tasted electricity on my tongue. A single, dusty rocking horse sat in the center, its paint flaked into ghostly white patches. I knelt and ran a fingertip along its carved mane, and a faint click rang out, like a toy wound for play. My pulse spiked. In the gloom, I spotted a battered trunk tucked into a corner. I crawled to it, my knees slick against the cold floor, and pried open the rusted latch. Inside lay a child's dress folded neatly atop a collection of brittle letters and a small music box missing its carousel horses. I lifted the letters and read by flashlight. They were Eleanor's own words, matching the photograph's sorrowful eyes. She wrote of loneliness, of promises whispered in this very chamber by a voice she trusted. The last letter ended mid-sentence. "Mother says I must stay here forever." My chest tightened. Behind me, a soft scuff sounded, as though someone rocked on the horse. I spun and caught a glimpse of movement, a pale shape vanishing around a stone pillar. My blood froze. I felt her presence, a small hand brushing the air, a breath of longing against my cheek. The dress in my arms trembled, and the music box shuddered with mute voices. There was no turning back now. I gathered the dress and letters, my mission clear: to reunite Eleanor's story with the light of day, or become another whisper lost in this subterranean cradle of memory. I climbed the ladder and hauled the dress, letters, and music box back into the hush of the attic, every step a hammering reminder of Eleanor's unseen presence beside me. My fingers trembled as I laid the items on the dusty floorboards, the air thick with the coppery scent of memory and the faint electric tingle of something watching. I unfolded the dress and draped it over the wardrobe's central bar. The fabric fell like a pale shroud across the carved faces, and a soft groan emanated from within the wood, as though the house itself exhaled. I arranged the letters in a neat stack and lifted the photograph, pressing it to the dress's lace bodice. A sudden draft rattled the attic window, scattering dust into lamplight, and I heard a child's sigh, quivering with relief. My heart leaped, hope and dread entwined in my chest. I opened the music box and let its silent carousel wind down, listening to the hollow clicks as if each one measured a heartbeat. Then I read Eleanor's last words aloud, voice steady despite the chill that crept up my spine. "I forgive you, Mother, but only if you remember me." The attic seemed to pulse with her longing, the shadows flickering like fingertips against the walls. The dress fluttered. The photograph lifted an inch from the bodice as though held by invisible breath. I swallowed hard and spoke her name, soft and sure, willing the words to bridge the gap of decades. Silence held for a trembling moment. Then the air grew warm, and the letters lifted in a swirl before landing gently on the floor in chronological order. The wardrobe doors creaked shut on their own, sealing the shroud of fabric inside, and I felt a final light brush against my hand. Eleanor's touch. I sank to my knees, breath flooding my lungs, and realized I was crying for a child I had never met, and a grandmother who mourned in silence. The attic returned to stillness, but it felt less empty now, suffused with the quiet echo of release. I gathered the dress, letters, and music box and carried them downstairs to my father's study, where I placed them on the mantel beside Eleanor's photograph in the family album. The music box chimed once, a single clear note that lingered in the air like a benediction. In that moment, I understood that memory is not a prison, but a promise, a bond that neither time nor sorrow can sever. I left the house as the first winter storm began, my shoulders lighter and my heart reshaped by what I had unearthed and finally laid to rest. If you felt Eleanor's story stir something in you, please like this video and subscribe to WhisperTales for more haunting journeys that honor the echoes of those we've lost. As I walked away from the old house, the winter wind gnawed at my coat and carried with it a whisper of Eleanor's lullaby, not as a lament, but as a soft benediction. I felt her presence in every gust, a reminder that the past we carry can shape us only if we allow it to remain unspoken. In the days that followed, I found myself drawn to forgotten mementos in my own life. An heirloom pocket watch, letters I never sent, photographs I once dismissed. Each held its own story of loss and longing, and I began to honor them rather than hide from them. My relationships shifted. I listened more attentively to my father's quiet grief, offered comfort to friends wrestling with their own regrets, and found a profound connection in shared remembrance. Late at night, the melody of Eleanor's dress and the echo of her words would drift through my dreams, no longer a trap, but an invitation to carry her memory forward. I started writing her story, interweaving her letters with my own reflections, creating a living archive of grief transformed into understanding. The act of remembering became an act of love, a conscious choice to bridge the chasm between what was lost and what still endures. Standing before the wardrobe one last time, I felt neither fear nor duty, but a gentle gratitude. The faces carved into the wood seemed to watch me with quiet approval as I closed the doors and wiped away the lingering dust. The chamber beneath remained sealed, its secrets honored, its sorrow at peace. I left the house knowing that memory is both a sanctuary and a mirror. It reveals who we were, who we are, and who we have the power to become. I returned to my life changed, more empathetic, more present, and unafraid to encounter the echoes of the past. From the moment I slipped through the jagged gap in the crumbling brick wall, the air shifted, growing heavy with a sweetness like damp soil left to rot, and I realized I'd crossed into another world. The only light came from lanterns dangling on rusted chains, their glass panes cracked and dark, as if 1,000 tiny suns had all gone out at once. Every step echoed, wood groaning under my weight, a hollow drumbeat that seemed to answer itself from some impossible distance, and I felt the floorboards tremble, as though something unseen paced just beyond my field of vision. The scent of wet clay and the sharp tang of old metal clawed at my nostrils, and a sudden drop in temperature made the hairs along my spine stand at attention. I could taste the cold, copper and fear, bitter on my tongue. In the silence between echoes, I thought I heard a whisper, faint as breath across my ear. But when I strained to listen, it dissolved into the hush. My lantern in hand was useless, its wick sodden, flame quenched long ago, and I felt along the walls until my fingers brushed damp stone, cool and slick, veins of mineral shining like wet bone. Somewhere deeper in the labyrinth, The chains rattled, as if pulled by a slow, deliberate hand, and the lanterns above me swayed. Though there was no breeze, my heart hammered. Not from exertion, but from something older, a primitive warning that I was not meant to be here. Yet I pressed on, drawn by a promise I couldn't articulate. A voice, perhaps, promising answers in the darkness. With each step, the corridor narrowed, the lanterns congregating until they formed a canopy of dead light overhead. And I realized too late that I had passed a point of no return. The walls seemed to lean in, closing around me, and I wondered if I would emerge changed, or if I would simply dissolve into the shadows, another whisper lost among the extinguished lanterns. A thin sliver of moonlight slipped through a crack overhead, illuminating a single rusted lantern perched on a stone pedestal. Its pane shattered, but inside, a faint ember glowed, pulsing like a wounded heartbeat. I approached it, every breath tasting of damp clay and iron, and felt the air thicken around me, as though the lantern itself inhaled my heat. My fingers hovered over its cold metal frame, hesitant, remembering why I'd come. To reclaim what was lost here, to find the thread that tied my sister's disappearance to this maze of silent shadows. A distant echo of movement drew my attention. The floorboards groaned under a weight I could not see, and the tremor ran through my boots, crawling up my spine. I knelt, pressing my ear to the cracked stone beside the pedestal. Beneath the lantern's faint glow, I heard a soft tapping, deliberate yet hesitant, like someone rapping from the other side of a dream. My pulse surged. I had no lantern of my own, yet I could feel the ember's warmth radiating, guiding me deeper. With a trembling hand, I lifted the lantern, and its ember pulsed brighter, bathing the corridor in a sickly amber light. The walls, once smooth and unmarked, revealed scratches, letters carved in a spidery hand, half effaced by time and moisture. M-A-Y-A. The name of my sister, perhaps? Or a warning? A gust of frigid air snuffed the ember to darkness, plunging me into void. I gasped, the echo of my own voice snarling back at me. I struck the lantern's side against the stone, coaxing the ember to life once more. When light returned, the corridor had shifted. Piles of debris now blocked the path I'd just walked, forcing me to turn left into a narrower hall where the stale scent of rot and ozone stung my lungs. Each step was accompanied by a hollow groan, as though the labyrinth itself resented my intrusion. Ahead, a heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar, its surface carved with a single pulsing symbol, a ring of extinguished lanterns encircling a solitary flame. The ember in my palm flared in response, stark against the door's dark wood. I paused, breath caught between dread and determination, and pushed the door open, stepping into silence so profound it pressed against my eardrums like water. The whispering began again, but this time it felt closer, inside me, beneath my ribs, as though the labyrinth had found its way into my chest. The chamber's air was thick, as if every inhalation dragged a veil of dampness down my throat, and the ember's glow revealed walls slick with condensation, veins of mineral dripping slow rivulets onto the rough stone floor. The door behind me creaked shut without a touch, plunging me into a confined world lit only by the trembling lantern. My foot slipped on something soft and cold, a piece of fabric, frayed and familiar. I knelt, brushing away muck to uncover a small shoe, its leather cracked, the initials M.A. embossed on the sole. My breath caught. A low hum began, vibrating through the floor like a distant lullaby, and the ember beat in time, casting shadows that writhed against the walls. I pressed the shoe to my chest, its weight heavier than I expected, and taste of metal flooded my mouth. Memories unspooled. Maya's laugh drifting through summer dusk, her small hand in mine, our promises whispered under a fading sun. the memory slipped, leaving only ache. Then, from the far corner, a lantern flickered to life, though no breeze stirred. Its pale light fell on a carved niche where dozens of identical shoes lay in neat rows, each with different initials. A name. Too many names. And here, another shoe marked with my own initials, worn as if I too had wandered these halls before. Panic hammered in my ears, drowning the lullaby. I tried to rise, but the haste of my breath snapped the ember, quenching all light. Absolute darkness pressed in. I sensed the walls moving, tightening, a whisper from every corner. Maya. Maya. But also my name. Lost in the same hush. I fumbled for the lantern, fear scorching my fingertips. The echo of footsteps, soft, deliberate, approached. There was no turning back now. The labyrinth had claimed me as it had claimed her. The door slammed behind me with a thud that rattled my teeth, and instantly the air grew colder, carrying the sharp tang of ozone and something sweetly metallic, like dried blood on rusted metal. Lanterns hung in concentric circles overhead, their glass panes opaque with grime, their chains humming a low, mournful song as though alive. In the center of the chamber lay a music box, its lacquered wood chipped and bleached by time. When I nudged it with a trembling finger, a warped lullaby crept out, each note dragging its feet in slow motion, echoing against the damp stone. The ember in my palm responded, pulsing brighter with every quavering chord until the lanterns flickered, revealing scores of dusty portraits lining the walls. Faces I recognized from dreams I'd never had, mouths stitched shut in silent screams. Beneath each portrait, a single shoe lay like a tombstone, one missing its pair, and I realized with a shock that the shoes matched the names carved earlier. Maya, Elise, Hendrik, and then my own. The lullaby stopped abruptly, and the silence tasted like ash. The walls seemed to breathe, inhaling the glow of my lantern, drawing me forward along a narrow passage slick with condensation and lined with peeling frescoes that portrayed my sister walking these corridors, eternally searching. With each step, the floorboards groaned as if warning me to turn back. But there was no retreat. Behind me, the door had vanished, replaced by an unbroken wall of stone so smooth it seemed impossible. The corridor forked ahead, two archways swallowing the gloom. From the left came the soft patter of water, a breath of moss and rot. From the right, a faint crackle, like embers snapping in a dying fire. The music box's final note lingered in my mind, begging a choice. Follow the echo of loss, or pursue the spark of truth. My heart hammered, filling my ears with the sound of my own blood. But I understood then that this labyrinth demanded more than footsteps. It demanded surrender of who I had been. Clutching the music box to my chest, I took the left path into darkness, the whisper of my own name trailing behind me like an accusation. The passage narrowed further, the drip-drip of water morphing into a steady pulse that vibrated beneath my boots, and the air grew so damp it clung to my skin like a second layer. Every step sent ripples across shallow puddles, each one reflecting lanterns that hovered mere inches above the water, their pale glimmers dancing across the low ceiling in a wavering, hypnotic ballet. The scent of wet moss and decaying leaves was thick in my nostrils, and in a moment of vertigo I thought I saw strands of kelp drifting down from the stone walls, though the labyrinth was far from any ocean. I pressed on, clutching the music box, its warped tune now a muffled echo inside my skull, and wondered if this place had once been alive with voices like mine, each voice trapped until its lantern finally died. Then, at the corridor's end, the water pooled into a shallow basin, perfectly still, like black glass. I knelt to peer into it, and the reflection stared back. Not my own gaunt face, but Maya's, pale eyes hollow, lips parted in a silent plea. My breath caught, and the surface broke with a soft splash as my fingers hovered above the water, sending concentric waves that distorted her image into 100 fractured fragments. A soft voice rose behind me. "Stay with me." So familiar that I spun, half expecting to see her step from the shadows. Instead, I found only the lantern I'd extinguished earlier, now suspended in midair, its ember glowing bright and steady for the first time. I rose, trembling, as the water's edge began to lap at my boots, though there was no current. The whispering grew urgent, echoing through the low vaults, voices melding into a single, sorrowful lament, naming my deepest fear, forgetting. I understood then that this chamber was not a trap, but a mirror. The labyrinth feeds on memory, and each extinguished lantern is a soul's final secret lost to darkness. Ahead, a narrow archway framed a light so pure it hurt to look at, a perfect beacon untouched by grime, promising escape or final oblivion. My heart thundered. The choice lay before me. Step into that radiance and risk every memory I held dear, or turn back into the labyrinth's embrace and remain tethered to loss forever. With a sob caught in my throat, I took a slow, decisive step forward, music box in hand, feeling the water rise around me as the whispering swelled into a single command. "Come home." I stepped into the light, and it was nothing like the sun's warmth. I felt no heat, only a hushed illumination that seeped into my bones, as if the labyrinth itself had exhaled its final secret. The water rose to my knees, cool and unyielding, but I did not flinch. The music box pressed against my chest was silent now, its wood warm and smooth. Ahead, a corridor of white stone stretched impossibly long, unblemished by moss or grime, each block fitting so perfectly that the seams seemed drawn with moonlight. The ember in the lantern glowed steady, guiding me forward without shadow or doubt. As I walked, the whispering ceased, replaced by a silence so profound it pressed against my eardrums until I thought I might shatter. Then, beneath my boots, the stones shifted, softly at first, then cracking like old bones. In that moment, I understood. The labyrinth was not a place but a mirror of memory, a vault that held every fragment of my past in lantern-lit halls. Each bulb extinguished here was a memory lost out there, in the world I left behind, and each soul trapped here belonged to someone who refused to let go. At the corridor's end stood a mirror framed in tarnished silver. My reflection stared back at me, hollow-eyed, gaunt, but alive. Behind me, through the mirror's glass, I saw Maya. Smaller, her hair dark and damp, her lips curved in a sad smile. She raised a finger to the glass, and I felt a tug in my chest, as if her memory pulled at my heart. I placed the lantern on a pedestal beside the mirror. Its ember flared, lighting a cluster of lanterns overhead until the entire chamber pulsed with soft gold. The mirror's surface rippled, and I stepped forward, through the glass, into a cavern of soft earth and wildflowers. The scent of summer rain filled my lungs, and distant birdsong trembled in the air. Maya stood at the tunnel's mouth, eyes bright with recognition. I reached for her, but the ground trembled once more, and she dissolved into petals carried away by a breeze I could not feel. The path behind me sealed with stone, and I knew I had crossed the point of no return. In that instant, I understood who I had been, a brother consumed by loss and guilt, chasing shadows through endless halls, and I realized who I could become, someone who carries her memory lightly, allowing it to guide rather than imprison. With a steady breath, I turned away from the glass and walked deeper into the garden, lantern in hand, the echo of footsteps no longer lonesome but assured. If you've felt the weight of a memory that won't let you go, know that sometimes the bravest step is into the light of what remains. If this journey through the labyrinth of extinguished lanterns spoke to you, please light up that like button and subscribe to WhisperTales for more tales that will guide you through the shadows of your own mind.